are going to get going because Saturday morning at this hour, people will be drifting in. We're going to start with Janelle Esparza. And I want to start with her because she's the photographer in multimedia. And then we will then move on to the two painters. Is that okay, everybody? All right. She's a native of Corpus Christi and came to San Antonio in '08 to attend UTSA, where she majored in art and did photography. I'm happy to say that we see her often because she works at the McNay, where she's been there since 2016 in the education department. She's a very talented photographer, but has also grown to various multimedia, of which you will see evidence today. Janelle Esparza is, we're just happy to have you. You got 15 minutes, and then we'll have some Q&A.
Awesome. Everyone can hear me all right? Do I have a slideshow, or am I just talking?
Would you like to be here at the podium? We're happy to have you.
I'm okay. Yeah,
Okay.
you're good. Thank you. Okay, great. I thought we were going to have a slideshow, but I'm happy to just kind of speak on it a little bit. Do I press something on here? The green one? The big green one. Oh, okay. That one's Rigoberto's. Should we switch? Let's do that. Right? Let's do that. Yeah, I'm perfectly happy with that.
I'll go up there.
Okay.
Okay, well, my name is Rigoberto Gonzalez, and I want to thank, the Witte Museum for inviting me to participate in this talk, and also, I don't get a lot of chances to come out to San Antonio, so I'm really enjoying being here. Let me show you one of my first images here. This way, or I don't know. The big green. Here. Well, I am originally from Reynosa. I was born in Mexico. I was born on the Mexican side. And okay, this is one of my most recent paintings. And let me read to you a little bit of my notes, to get started with my talk here. So this painting, the notes that go along with it, let me start reading here. The Roman poet Ovid wrote about the mythological river in ancient Greece called the Marsyas, which flows and has its origins in blood and tears. And so it's not unlike the Rio Grande, which similarly in our time flows with the many tragedies such as kidnappings, executions, family separations, which occur and take place on the cities and towns along the banks of the river. This one is titled La Ribera del Diablo, or the rivers, or the Devil's Riverside, and it's a painting of the border. You've got the Mexican side on to the, I guess to the crowd's left, and the American side on the opposite side. And if you look closely, there's a group of immigrants. I mean, it's a tiny group of immigrants, and they're facing all these obstacles in their journey. You've got the river, you've got the natural, obstacles, and then also you've got, if they make it past that, they've got the border wall, and If you look up in the clouds, there's one of those observation drones as well. So it's all the obstacles that are placed for the immigrants along their journey. And so this is what my work deals with, contemporary, social economic problems that are occurring along the border. But like with my first sentence here, quoting Ovid, he's a Roman poet. He wrote a very seminal book called The Metamorphoses that many artists have found it very inspiring. And when I read that book, it's from Roman times. That poem, it talks about this river, how this river originates from the torture of a mythological creature also, and his family and his friends, they cry so much, and the blood flows in such abundance that it creates a mythological river. So I couldn't help but make the connection. And so just to move on to some of the other work that I have on display here. For example, this is a border crossing. This painting was in the portrait exhibition at the Smithsonian in Washington, D.C., and it traveled throughout the country. The painting depicts a crossing, and most of my work is, all of it is figurative. There's a strong human element. But I also like to point out that you want to be aware of the landscape. I'm an admirer of the Baroque tradition in painting. Very dramatic lighting, violent scenes. You'll see some in the next ones. But the landscape, in this case, it's the landscape across the border from El Paso. You have Ciudad Juarez, the colonias, the shanty towns. So the terrain there is very different than in South Texas. It's very flat. But they've been affected both by neoliberalism, globalization. The shanty towns. Growing up in Mexico, I spent some time living in a colonia like this, and the reason those towns sprang up in that condition is in the 60s Mexico had this program of luring companies from abroad so that they could invest in the area, and so all these companies settled in along the border, and it created a very fast migration from other parts of Mexico to the border. And so those border cities, you'll find a center that is historical, and then everything else there was no urban planning, so they just grew. They just grew tremendously, and there's no adequate access to water. The cities, they're not properly lit. And so for a while it became prosperous. There were many jobs, but then because of globalization, the companies moved through other parts of the world. You had like high unemployment, and then you had NAFTA, and so the people that were there looking for jobs ended up with high unemployment. So then you have the problem with the drug trafficking. So all these problems are related. So the young men in those cities, they start to become smugglers. They start to become hitmen, because that is one of the only sources of jobs for them. And also we've become familiar with the terrible term of feminicide. Speaking about the murders of women in Ciudad Juarez. And if you visit those cities, because they're so dimly lit at night, that facilitates the abduction of women. So the painting depicts a family crossing, but it's the dystopian, modern, Western landscape. I like to think of myself as following the tradition of American landscape, Western landscape painting, but it is not the glorious landscape painted in the 1800s. It's the modern, just the tragedy of the Western landscape. So that's and just representing the brutal violence that happens on the Mexican side. I mean, I don't want you to think that this is happening on the U.S. side, but this does happen very closely to where I live in. On the U.S. side, right across the border, you have this ongoing conflict between drug cartels. And so this painting has two titles. It has a modern title and a more universal title that relates to mythology. And that title is Perseus with the head of Medusa. And the modern title is relates to the cartels, which in Spanish it's a mujer del cartel del Golfo decapitada por los Zetas, or a female member of the Gulf cartel beheaded by the Zeta cartel. And so these images, I create them by bringing in the influences that I find interesting. Again, Caravaggio's lighting, the Baroque lighting, and also a lot of those narco terror videos that if you're brave enough, you can look up online. I mean, they're very gruesome. They show they're made to intimidate the rivals. But also this kind of terror videos, they have their origins in the second Iraq war. A lot of people were being kidnapped and then they were executed, and then they would use these videos to terrorize the public. So these tactics were also employed by the cartels, and the use of those videos is around 2003, 2004, which coincides with the invasion of Iraq. So these paintings are large. They're all life-size figures. This one is more just depicting the culture, the music of the area, but also showing the landscape, and I guess trying to depict people that you would otherwise not pay a lot of attention to. Like if you ever visit a border town, you will see men like these coming over and asking if you would like to hear them play a song, and sometimes you just kind of brush them along, like don't bother me. But I think they're incredibly interesting personalities. So that's why I decided to paint this. Also the scale, I always try and do the horizon line really low so that it gives them a lot of monumentality. So this is called Conjunto del Bravo, the Rio Bravo. That's what you call the Rio Grande on the Mexican side. And this one is again depicting the torture, the beheadings that happen along the border. And I try and make things also contemporary. If I didn't have that piece of duct tape there, then it would just be something that was painted in the 1600s or 1700s. But that makes it more relevant as to what is happening along the border nowadays. And the last one is this mural-sized painting that I completed about 9 years ago, and it's I showed it different cities. I showed it in El Paso and in McAllen, and depending where I showed it, I would change the name to it. When I showed it in El Paso, I said I called it Shootout in Ciudad Juarez, and then when I showed it in McAllen, I called it Shootout in Reynosa, which are the cities that are right across the border. And it's the same. You had the same culture, the same problems, so people could really relate to it just by changing, the title. It's the same characters. The Mexican Federal Police, the musicians, the population that is terrified. And even though I did it, about 10 years ago, it is still very much what it is happening now, and I don't see an end to it. Tragically, there's not an end to it, but it continues to provide a lot of a lot of sources for subject matter for my paintings. And so yeah, so that's my work.
I'm going to say a few words about you. So we kind of rushed in, had to shift gears because of the images, but like a good professor that he is, he made good adjustments, quick adjustments. He is a professor at UT, Rio Grande Valley. He got his education at University of at Pan Am University, now Rio Grande Valley, and then in New York City. I think he mentioned he was born in Reynosa. So we are now going to hear from Janelle Esparza, who is native of Corpus Christi. One of the things about being engaged here is this the title. I didn't come up with the title. I think Ron, Maurice, and Mary Margaret came up with the title. It's complicated. So why would it be complicated? Well, one of the reasons I think it's complicated is there are 4 of us here who might, by the New York Times, if they were here, identify us as Latinos, but all of us use different identifications. Rigoberto identifies himself as Mexican, and maybe we'll use others. Janelle, probably Latina, Mexican American, Tejana. I haven't asked her. Rick, Armendariz, being from El Paso, probably Mexican American, Latino, Chicano, Tejano, border man. And so I wanted to say that the complexities of it, myself, I identify as Latino, Hispano, Chicano, Mexican American, and others. But we see this growing in the shift, and so 10 years from now we'll be sitting here, and they will be introducing people as Latinx, and we'll say, where'd that come from? Well, it's just emerged right now. So I'm not sure, can you find out what's next? So that, oh, it's yours, okay. Janelle Esparza, who is a graduate of UTSA. She currently works as the principal educator at the Magnet. Been there since 2016. She's a photographer, and as you will see, she works in multimedia. A very talented person. Good to have you, Janelle.
Thank you, Dr. Romo and Mary Margaret and the Witte Museum for inviting me to speak alongside some awesome friends and colleagues and very talented people, and I'm very happy to be here and present a little on my work. So yeah, this is me in a field in Banquete, Texas, in South Texas near Robstown and Alice and Fremont and Falfurrias. There's all these little towns like sprinkled all really close to each other. My grandma lives out there. And as Dr. Romo had mentioned earlier, I'm originally from Corpus Christi, Texas, which is just an hour outside of all of that. And so that's the area and the region that I grew up in. And so cotton fields are really familiar to me. Just driving out to my grandma's house, we spent a lot of time in between Corpus and Fremont growing up. And so the cotton fields all along those highways are they're really nostalgic for me. And then growing up, I always kind of knew that, my grandmother picked cotton, my grandfather did, and but I don't think I put the collective history together until I was well out of college, and just realizing how much of an influence that these cotton fields have on our lives as Latinos, as South Texans, as Tejanos. And so that has been influencing my work for the last couple of years. How do I advance? Do I just press the green one again? Okay, perfect. So it kind of started off before all of this cotton I still had this really great, immense interest in the landscape, and I was also really into palmistry, and I really liked the impressions of our bodies and our skin and all the lines in our palms, and also like the same textures and striations that show up in nature, and I thought there was a definite connection there. And so when you kind of pair that in with the study of palmistry and the idea that you could tell your past, present, and future in the palm of your hand. Like, what could the land tell us if we read all the striations within that? So it's like a whole other universe that I was kind of exploring in various ways. And I was making these little multimedia installations like this one here from 2013, I think. With, you know, it was a video installation of some of the ocean water in Corpus, and some hand printed, screen printed curtains, and there were prints on the walls and stuff, and there was a sandbox, and everything was really moving around. There was like wind inside the gallery, and it was just like an immersive installation that was meant to connect you with nature and the water and everything. So it started off with this connection to nature, and then there it is. And then, so this is the photo that I was taking in that slide just a moment ago out in Banquete, Texas. Because I started to realize, like, not only is there just this universal connection to nature, right? But there's stories in these specific landscapes that we grew up in, and in how I was also just interested in how an environment can shape you as a person. And knowing your own history, knowing the history of your family members, of your ancestors and everything, it changes you. And if you didn't necessarily know that when you were growing up, it's a new realization when you're an adult. And so that's what I've been concentrating on the last couple of years, specifically with cotton, the cotton industry, cultivation, and the labor, and the people that did the labor, and coming from that kind of labor. It's something that I've been really, really intrigued in speaking about and making work about. And so in 2016, I received a grant from the National Association of Latino Arts and Culture, or NALAC for short, and they just turned 30 years old this month, and they had their 30th anniversary celebration recently at my gallery, at Presta House Gallery, and I'm just very proud to be associated with them. I love and support that organization. They support Latino arts all over the country, and in Puerto Rico and parts of Latin America as well. And so they gave me my first grant in 2016, and it really helped me. It really gave me this little trajectory into my work, and it really allowed me to explore into different mediums outside of photography, which is something that I had done. I was pretty central on for a while. So I did a photo-based installation, and I reproduced that panoramic photo of that cotton field at 10 feet by 25 feet in the gallery. And it was the first thing that you saw when you walked in. This was at the Guadalupe Cultural Arts Center. And it was kind of like a larger-than-life mural, and I really wanted people to feel like you were in the field. And I took this angle where it was just really low to the ground, and the cotton bolls are, you know, probably about half the size of you, and it was just this immense presence. And it brought back a lot of nostalgic memories for a lot of people. I listened to a lot of stories. I had community conversations throughout the exhibition, and learned about just people's experiences in the fields, and I don't think those stories are heard enough. So it was nice. You know, we just had bundles and coffee, and people came in just from the neighborhood and shared. We sat in a circle and we shared stories, and it was lovely. And so I'll just kind of go through a little more. That was another part of the installation that year. That is an antique. It's like a hanging scale, and it's how, you know, you weighed your cotton and everything, and how you got paid. And these were these little kind of like mirror light boxes. It's called an infinity mirror. So inside of there is a cotton spur, which is a cotton boll. When the cotton's taken out, they call it a spur. And I cast them in bronze, and they look like these beautiful little star shapes. And I put them inside of these boxes that I made with mirrored plexi, and with a little light shining, it made an infinity mirror, so that the reflection kind of went on into infinity. And it was just making like little rows of cotton, and it was really kind of celestial, and it was a cool process. And I continued with that, and I didn't have access to bronze casting anymore, but I discovered electroplating and you could do that with natural objects, and it's really beautiful. And I also liked that the plant is still inside there. It's not like a burnout process like in the casting. And so so I had a bunch of those made, and and they just have a different feel and a different weight to them as well. So I continued with the cotton plant. I still have boxes and boxes of these plants. I go out and stop on the side of the road, and probably shouldn't do that, but I do pick a little bit and take a little bit and use a little bit, and I use every piece. I use all the dirt and the leaves and the stems, and of course the cotton fiber, and in various different ways. But last summer, summer of 2018, I was the Texas resident at Art Pace here in San Antonio, and it was a really wonderful opportunity to keep exploring this story of cotton, and I made another filas, as I call these filas, a light box, an infinity box, but it was like expanded, where instead of those little boxes were 8 by 8 by 8 inches, and you really had to it was a really intimate experience. You had to get really close to see the infinity mirror, and these were 36 inches wide. So you could, from across the room, you could see the rows kind of go on into infinity, and I had 2 of them in that gallery, and that was awesome. So this was the full installation. I was weaving, and I used some driftwood pulled out of a lake, and more cotton spurs, and I had some glass and also some soft sculpture. So it was a multimedia endeavor, and it was touching on cotton and cotton labor, and tying that in with the body and what that kind of labor can do to the body. It was like an abstract representation of the toll that kind of labor can take on one, and I also learned to weave on a loom for that exhibition, and so I was like using my own body to create this work, and it just kind of made sense. And so these are the tapestries here. These were all made with some natural brown and natural white cotton. So the cotton is actually grown that color. It isn't dyed. And I thought that was a great way to show. It was like real fleshy skin tone, really natural. And then the white cotton kind of coming in there was kind of like a scar tissue design, if you will. And then I kind of like sprinkled in these little spots of this really lovely iridescent blue silk. It was a Japanese blue silk. But I had to have some kind of healing in the middle of all that pain, that story of pain. And so I mimicked that color blue, and I had a paint made out of it and painted it on the pedestals and painted it on the wall. And I had to have something healing in there if I'm going to be talking about all this turmoil and, this ravaging that kind of work does to one's body. And then, you have to have a healing process as well. So I thought the blue color was going to represent that. And here's just a close-up of one of those tapestries. Weaving is such a beautiful process, by the way. It was interesting. So I think I just like to move. I like to try a bunch of different processes that I've never done before. So bronze casting, weaving. I really wanted to use the fiber and use the plant in a specific way. And I actually took classes at the Southwest School of Art to learn how to do all of these things. And I'm really glad that after they became accredited with their BFA program, they still kept their community classes open. So if you want to go and learn a process, it's very easy to do that. And they have such a talented staff there, and I'm really grateful to them. So they taught me how to weave, and I wove. So this is a photo. A lot of the sculptural stuff I was making was kind of based off of these historic photos. And so this is a gentleman in a field, bent over, and on his belt is a short-handled hoe. It's a garden hoe. And those were outlawed in 1975 in California because of the toll that it took on one's body to bend over in the field like that. They had long-handled garden hoes, but they didn't allow them to use them. And for generations, there were these farm workers who were just, I mean, they had kidney problems, circulation, of course, back and muscle problems for the rest of their lives after this kind of work. And so, I'm not sure if I put the slide. Yes, so I had the garden hose fabricated in borosilicate glass, and I modified it to where it kind of mimicked what it did to the body and that shape that it took. And I had 2 of those made, and I just thought they were really painful, but also delicate and fragile. And it all went back to the body being the same way, being fragile and delicate, but also really strong, resilient, and sharp. There was a soft sculpture as well with some of that. I just had an abundance of cotton yarn, and it was so lovely to work with. And it was unmercerized, so it was just soft and fluffy, but it was also really delicate. If you overworked it, it would just disintegrate. So I made this. It's actually a knot that you create when you're going to warp a loom to kind of store it, because you'll have this yards and yards and yards of yarn, and you can't really store that very easily. So there's this specific knot that you tie, and it looks like a little snake. And so to me, that was kind of like a spine. And I called this piece tender. It was kind of like a muscle fiber, and it was just a really expressive way to tie it back to the body and connect that fiber in the fields with us. And this is just some other work that I do, some embroidery work. This was an embroidery block. It was unfinished, and it was in a pile of fabric scraps that my grandmother had given me, and she had not finished this one. She had just kind of sketched this woman backflipping, and it was really unlike any of the other imagery that she usually drew, like women in bonnets with flowers and stuff, and so this was kind of unusual, but I loved it, and it just had an incredible statement for her, to make something like that, like a woman backflipping. There's just so much. It's kind of a heavy image, right, when you think about it. And so I took that, and she had a lot of other unfinished quilt blocks in there that I finished on my own, like a little house, and then I added this thing on there. And the woman with the bonnet, that's typically how she depicted women in her embroidery, and I added the rest of that. And then there was she used to tell this story about the first time she ever saw paper money, and I made that into a quilt block as well. It says, among the wood shavings, she found the most beautiful piece of green paper for her doll's dress. And she just thought it was the most like a really beautiful piece of decorative paper. And she took it home and gave it to her mom and asked her mom to make it into a dress for her doll. And of course she didn't, but $20 was a lot of money back then. And she found it on the floor when she was like 6. So anyway, she likes to tell that story a lot. So I made it into a quilt block. And then I took all of these embroidered quilt blocks and I made it into an American flag quilt with a lot of different, kind of like a crazy quilt style. It's like a traditional, kind of a communal way of making quilts. There's lots of scrap material in there. It's like old clothing and skirts and bed sheets, and of course the quilt blocks on there. And I called it Continent, and it was a piece about collective stories and histories of women, women's work. Am I out of time? I think I'm going over. I'll just kind of skip through. This is another fabric piece, another textile piece. It's an American flag, and instead of the stars of the Union, it's cotton seeds. It is made to scale of a real American flag with 50 cottonseed stars, if you will, and 2 different kinds of cotton fabric, a lighter one and a darker one, but still natural colored. And this was more of the cotton work. It's just another aspect of the cotton story. And it really reminded me of my grandfather being a veteran, but also coming from the fields and also being of Mexican descent and all of that. So it kind of told his story a little bit. I also put one in a box, a flag box. Yeah. I'm gonna end it right there because I think I've hit my time. But thank you guys for listening to me, and yeah, glad to be here.
So Richard Armendariz, professor at UTSA, is one of those individuals I have more information about than I ever need, because I wrote about one of his exhibits about a year and a half ago. But nonetheless, I like his artist statements, so I'm going to deal with that. Romanticism for the American landscape and the hybridization of Mexican, American, and indigenous cultures have always informed the content of my work. Images that have cultural, biological, and historical lineage are carved with power tools and burned into the surface of the painting, drawing, or the wood blocks that later become prints. I'm a big fan of his work, and he's here in San Antonio. He graduated from UTSA and got his MFA at the University of Colorado Boulder. He is a Berlin scholar, one of those individuals selected here in San Antonio to attend and go to Berlin. So, Richard Armendariz.
Thank you for coming. Just adjust this quick. Thank you to the Witte and Dr. Romo and my distinguished panel. It's amazing to be part of this. Well, my name is Richard Armendariz. I go by Ricky. I'm a professor now. Got promoted at UTSA, full professor. I'm in the painting department. I've painted and drew and sculpted for ever since I can remember. I'm originally from El Paso. Okay, here we go. I just wanted to talk just briefly about my influences. Growing up in El Paso, the museum there, when I was there, we didn't have a contemporary museum. We just had the Museum of Art initially. And I would go there to inform myself. I was infatuated with all the objects that were there, and Luis wasn't really, this is Luis Jimenez, wasn't part of the collection, but I was constantly interested in the mythology that was constant in that museum. Typically, Greek and Roman mythology informed a lot of the content of that work. So that didn't initially appeal to me. I thought that didn't kind of relate to my experience. It was later that I understood the connectivity of everything. So I was informed by work that was both high art and low art, velvet paintings on the wall, along with actually work by Luis Jimenez, because he was a family friend. And I never understood the difference between folk art and the work that he was making. But like Luis Jimenez, his interest in materials, this being fiberglass, and his references to spray painting, vaquero art, car culture, and even his father, who was an electrician, informed a lot of his particular aesthetic and his choice of materials. This is Carol Walker, paper cutout referencing the 19th century paper cutout artwork. So I was very interested in artists that were doing things that were outside the norm, using materials in new and inventive ways. Okay, this is James Luna, where he literally installed himself in a museum as a relic. Cesar Martinez, the man who loves women, he was really important to me, and it's great that I'm able to kind of talk to him now because he lives here in town. And so I was very interested in identity, materials. I think he even did some work on black velvet. So I sort of gravitated toward everybody who was doing something a little bit unusual. And early on, I was trying to find my identity. So I basically latched onto the idea of the Hollywood sort of impression of the Southwest, and how much that was correct and not correct at the same time. When you look at Hollywood movies and poetry of that time and all that, the themes are a little exaggerated, a little romantic, and you always have things that are signs that are carved in wood, painted wood. So I gravitated toward the carved in wood aesthetic. And it was reinforced by my many visits to Disneyland, or Frontierland, where you have everything carved and what have you. So I was painting and carving and trying to find something that felt like it was honest. It was coming from an honest place. This piece is entitled Neither Fish Nor Fowl. And I changed myself into a woman, an indigenous woman on the left side. And my ex-wife at the time, she's Anglo, so I turned her into Conan O'Brien. And those are my children. And then I started painting, really thinking about where I'm from, the landscape, really informed my sense of identity. It really was very, very different than the places that I traveled to. The sky seems to go forever. And I would couple it with truisms, dichos, or hooks from lyrics, song lyrics that I created. So it's amazing what you get rid of when you're drowning. And I would carve the text and the boat into the landscape with power tools as a way to kind of scar or defile the landscape. I enjoyed the coupling of both traditional and non-traditional tools to make my work. These are very large. They're 4 feet by 7 feet. I work in hell, pero cielo is on my mind, but heaven's on my mind. Your love is a tornado. This is Tlazolteotl as a horse. Tlazolteotl is the Mother Earth deity. She's the goddess of midwives. She is usually depicted with a black mouth because she eats the filth so that women can give birth clean and you have a healthy child. So I depicted Tlazolteotl as a horse ingesting like drones and missiles and bombs, and that there's even a kind of an Apache helicopter. This is a large 4 feet by 8 foot painted plywood surface that I carved into. And it gets very, very dense, and it's kind of modeled. The image is kind of modeled because I'm carving the plywood so shallow that sometimes I don't even break the surface of the painting. So it shows the previous layers of the painting. I do a lot of things, mostly 2D work nowadays. This is a series of prints that I made of curanderas, healers, that would come into our community and heal and then leave, primarily for just gas money. I've studied with a curandero for many years now, and my aunt was a curandera when I was younger. And we didn't really actually use those terms. She was just a healer. And so I would be asked to go out into the yard and pick hierbas, herbs, so she could heal the person that I wasn't related to that was in the house. And I was always, we always had people that that weren't related to us in our house. And typically I depicted these individuals with birds, and there's a drone in the upper right-hand corner. Because birds are sort of symbolic, both in my culture and in really in Greek and Roman mythology and throughout many different cultures. Animals that kind of are halfway in our world and halfway in the spirit world. I went to Berlin and went there fully intending to make work about the border and border issues, and became fascinated with a lot of the mythology in Berlin and in Germany. And I started really kind of borrowing icons, protagonists from a lot of different cultures, because I sort of started seeing the similarities, right, between the use of particular animals in many, many different cultures. And I joke that, like the Inuit don't necessarily own the whale as an image. Lots of traditions use whales. Lots of traditions use bears and grackles and ravens. And these are the ravens that are depicted here are they're crows, are hooded crows that I discovered in Berlin, and they look like a normal crow, but they look like they're wearing little white vests, which I thought was pretty cool. This is how bear escapes whale, or how crow helped whale to the sea. Again, referencing, Greek and Roman mythology. This is Callisto and Archaeus. This is Zeus and his children. And I became fascinated with the images by Goya, Zeus devouring his children. And I was at a certain place in my life where, most of the stuff that I'm depicting is autobiographical in some way. And I was going through a divorce at the time, and my children were, children. And so the story goes is that Zeus was prophesized to be unseated by his children. So what did he do? He devours his children. And here Zeus doesn't devour his children. He grows into old age, but his children sorely pick at him and nag at him for the rest of his life. Zeus dreams of himself. I was going to therapy, and it's something that I joke about because I went kicking and screaming, but now I love it. I think it's amazing because of the macho-ness in me. I felt that I could speak to my family or my friends and I could get all the therapy I needed. But going to a therapist, and this particular therapist that I was going to was really into dream imagery. And she was like, everything in your dream is you. And I was amazed by that. I thought, well, what does Zeus dream about? And Zeus is always being depicted as a bull and various other things. But I go, in his dream, does he sort of fight with himself as a bull? So I thought that was kind of a funny idea. These are a stack of animals referencing the musicians of Brennan, 4 feet by 8 feet. And the musicians of Brennan is like one of those stories that very few people in the States know, but if you go to Germany, it's like Hansel and Gretel. It's like something that's very, very common. Strangely enough, this is an image called It's Complicated. And the piece is a depiction of Zeus and Callisto, who were lovers, and I transformed them into their animal selves. And they're sort of fighting, but they're also kind of in embrace as well. And I titled that because, not only because of my personal life, but also I was fascinated that, and I wasn't really good at Facebook at the time, but there's like a little, when you put relationships down, there's a little title that says It's Complicated. I thought that was such an amazing way to kind of say, and to say a lot, but to say nothing at the same time. This is Juan de Pareja. It's an image that I took from one of Diego Velázquez's paintings, and he was his servant, and he was freed by Diego Velázquez. And Diego Velázquez didn't always paint. He was a court painter, so he painted primarily the court. But to paint his servant, who he freed, I sort of made up this story about him actually being Diego Velázquez's lover. And so there's all these images in the painting, carving, that kind of allude to that story. And you can't quite see it, but down below on his cravat is a reference to Tiger Army, which is one of my favorite bands. Coyote or Phaeton falling. Images of animals, light bulbs, and I'll just go kind of quickly because this is Kara Walker. This is me with the Cramps t-shirt. And so I do this kind of stuff for my students. I show them how to paint, and I paint very, very illusionistically. And it started as a little bit of a joke where I would take all the leftover paint and kind of defile the painting to show them that, whatever they're going to do tomorrow they're going to do better things. And then it became something. I put them in the corner of my gallery. Is like, my gallerist Patricia Rees-Healy is like, I really like those, and I'm like, no, that's just like garbage. And she's like, no, I really like those. So I would show them. These are all details of Diego Velázquez paintings, and I show them how to make this painting in a couple of days, and then take the painting and and those were called beauty marks. And then this is a piece called Tell Me Where It Hurts. Be back in 5 minutes. And this is a piece that's titled Only Time Will Tell. And it's Luis Jimenez, and this is how I'll sort of wrap up my conversation. But Luis was really, really important to me, and I think that I think his effect on artists is still being felt, and I'm waiting for one of those days where all of us get together that knew him or made work about him, and the exhibition is about him. So anyway, thank you very much.
Well, the mystery is solved. Now we know where its complicated title comes from. Thank you, all three of you. Exceptional presentations. That last piece that he was showing of Juan Pareja really intrigued me, and I missed it by a couple of minutes of buying that particular piece when it was at Reese Healy's gallery. So, but I remember writing about it. Any questions? I'm sure we have lots of thoughts here. You folks have generated so many different things. Yes.
Sure. The mic's in front of me. I'll go first. I have some pieces up now at Presto House Gallery with the Nalak 30-year show. There will be a group show at the Austin Public Library. I think it's going to be called Entre Líneas at the Austin Public Library Gallery Space in September. That same month, I'll put some work in at DePaul in Chicago, and solo show at the Rustenburg Gallery, TRGV, March of 2020. That's what I'm working at.
What do I have? I did this mentorship program with the Immigrant Mentor Program that's stationed in New York, and we're going to have our inaugural show. It's a group show where mentors and mentees are paired together, and we're exhibiting at the Centro de Artes downtown, the big pink building, and that's coming up here pretty soon in the summer. And then I always have work at Patricia Reese Healy Gallery in Olmos Park.
I have a show at Lutheran University in California. I think it's outside of LA. I haven't. It's hanging there, and I have a couple of prints at Presto House Gallery right now. They're available for purchase.
I'm pretty old. I'll just say that. It has, and I'm so fortunate that, and all the people in El Paso are so fortunate to have the Contemporary Museum and all the wonderful collections that are. Yes, it's a fantastic piece, and it's a signature piece that really kind of highlights that museum. Yeah. Yes, I print at Flatbed quite often. I got in touch with Catherine Bremberry, who runs the place. Because they print very large, and I initially was not very interested in prints at all because paper didn't interest me. I wanted to overwhelm the viewer, and when they told me that they could print, 8 feet wide, I was like, okay, I'm interested. And it became a relationship that has been mutually beneficial. And I love, right now actually, Hare and the Hound is printing something that I had to take the block and cut it in half. But they're printing something really, really large. It's 4 feet by 8 feet. Yeah. Thank you. And the museum that I was talking about was on Montana Street, you know, like way back when. So, you know, it was, yeah.
If you're in Houston, from Houston, so we had a show. We donated 100 pieces to the University of Houston downtown. The show just closed, and it's moving in 2 weeks to the African American Museum. And Ricky's piece was in the show for us, but, and unbeknown to both of us, Reese Healy is opening up her show today, her gallery in New York City. And the images that I've seen, I think will include Ricky's work in it opens today in New York City. I don't know the address, but I'm sure it's going to go by Reese Healy Gallery. So it continues to go. Now, yes, Maurice. Well, Maurice and I think I speak for everyone in this room and everybody in the buildings. You've done a terrific job here, and I credit you that when you gave me an assignment in 1985 to write an essay for Humanities Texas, you said, I want you to write about Luis Jimenez. And I interviewed him, and as a consequence, I ended up buying my first print from Luis Jimenez, which is now a very valuable print, La Piata. But you were able to get the permission to get the cover. The magazine was about this big, Luis Jimenez Vaquero on the cover. So you got into this a long time ago, and I think you've been influencing us as well. Okay, anything else? Yes, ma'am.
Yes. I've been part of an art collective for a long time. It actually stems from a curator I met when I was a graduate student at CU Boulder, Dr. Jorge Rivera, very important curator, and our collective is called Art Knots. And the goal has always been to show work in places that typically don't show artwork. Yeah, and so we've shown, you know, in the Amazon rainforest, we've shown in places in the Middle East, we've shown in China before it was open to you know, the way it's a commercial gallery now, in the XYZ art scene. So it's usually, what's fascinating about that is when he asked me to do this, he's like, you know, there's a chance that your work is never coming back. You know, and I told him, I go, that's cool, you know, consider it a donation. We make work that's pretty small. We literally frame it there, and it's shown. And then sometimes, because of the content, sometimes a little bit sensitive, the stuff doesn't come back. Like, you know, customs will seize it for all sorts of reasons. And you know, I've been really proud to kind of be part of that.
Well, thank you. I enjoy painting it. I know it's not easy for a lot of people to see that type of imagery, but I do. I enjoy creating that kind of artwork, and You have to see it also in real life because the scale is. I had a show at the Rubin Center with Kate when Kate was there. Yeah, yeah.